Yes.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Marvin Rappaport here once again with a panel discussion on the Borscht Belt, a part of our history and culture here in the Catskills that is changed to the point where most of it is in our memory, and we'd like to capture those memories. And I'm delighted to be joined by a number of individuals who are going to participate in a panel tonight about sports in the Catskills in the Borscht Belt. Not just sports, but sports stars. We wrote in our entry, our lead-in, where else could you go for a vacation and see Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier sparring? Hear Mickey Mantle, Roger Maris, and Tom Seaver speaking about baseball. Watch Wilt Chamberlain, Bill Russell, Dave Bing, and Walt Frazier, among others, playing basketball, usually at the Maurice Stokes game at Kutcher's, which we'll hear about. Tennis champs Billie Jean King and John McEnroe, hockey greats Wayne Gretzky and Mario Lemieux, and of course, watch Arnold Palmer playing golf. All you had to do was go in the Catskills in the 50s, 60s, 70s, even into the 80s. I'm delighted to be joined tonight by a number of individuals who are going to talk about their own experiences at their respective resorts and their relationships with a number of the sports stars. I'll introduce all of them now, and then we'll go right in that order. Mitchell Edis is a member of the Grossinger's family and was the last general manager of that resort, that wonderful and esteemed resort. He has since had a diverse career in gaming and hospitality, from Atlantic City to Nevada to becoming CEO of the Mohegan Sun and its parent company. Keeping with our sports theme, he also led the purchase of the Connecticut Sun of the WNBA, the Women's National Basketball Association, and he sat on the league's board of governors for 18 years. He'll be followed by Mark Kutcher, a classmate of mine, whose family owned Kutcher's Country Club for over 100 years, ultimately becoming the manager and owner and operator of that hotel. And he'll tell us about Kutcher's wonderful connection to sports, starting probably in the 50s, all the way up to its closing in the last days. And he'll give us a sense of all the various stars that were there. In addition, Steve White was the tennis pro at the Concord, and which his family owned. And he had relationships with a whole host of tennis stars and others. And we are fortunate tonight to have a number of slides that we're going to give you to see. Alan Barish is the former director of the Crawford Public Library, which is sponsoring tonight's conversation, as they have in the past, the Ethelbert B. Crawford Library, and as well as being a trivia maven. So Alan will add his point of view on a number of these. Please let me tell you that in order to see the slides, I'm told you need to stay in gallery view, even though you may be tempted to put the speaker view. If you want to, that's fine. If you want to see the slides during the course of their comments, you need to be in gallery view. Having said that, I think we're ready to begin. We will give you some time for questions, and you can use the chat function or the raise hand function if you have questions. And we'll leave some time, after about 45 minutes, give or take, and we'll hear what your questions may be or your experiences. Let's start with Mitchell Edis. Please, Mitchell.
Good evening, everybody, and thanks for the introduction and for asking me to be on this panel. Now, obviously, sports played a really big role in the Borscht Belt experience. And in my few minutes, I'm going to touch on the things that were central to Grossinger's and that were key to my memories and my upbringing living at the hotel. And I'm sure as others speak, you're going to hear things that shape all their different experiences based on their ages and their memories and the specific about their hotels versus my hotel. So I've got just 4 things I'm going to touch on because I was told I don't want to get the signal that I'm talking too long. So I'll be careful. And I was the one that said we should shorten introduction. So if I go long, I'm really in trouble. So anyway, the first thing was spring training and player visits. You talked about seeing star athletes next to you. We forget that not many years ago, all the pro athletes were not multimillionaires. And to them, back then, which was really not that long ago, a trip for a free weekend to the mountains, to Grossingers, to Kutchers during the All-Star break or during their time off or during their off season was a really big deal. They were really excited. It was a big time for their families. And they would love to come up, their guests would see them, and it was a treat for all. I remember my memories of Mike bossing the Islander teams, becoming regular visitors and becoming good friends of my brother and the family. And I remember very specifically, you have some things you remember when you're little, and I don't remember how little I was, but Nolan Ryan was a Met at the time, and he was there for the All-Star break. And I remember going over to watch him pitch during the All-Star break over by the toboggan run, and he was pitching to some coach, and hearing the ball hit the catcher's mitt from Nolan Ryan as a little kid was just an amazing thing. And all of those, I think, when guests were there and they'd see that, or they'd meet them in the Lou Goldstein panel discussions in the lobby, those were the things that created memories for the guests, just like they created memories for me. And of course, I'd be remiss in not mentioning Jackie Robinson's relationship with my grandmother, Jenny. It was so big in his life that when Rachel Robinson wrote a book about his life, a whole chapter of the book was devoted to Grossingers and how warm they felt and how great it was being there. Secondly is golf. And I think we need to remember the mountains developed, because the resorts provided amenities to the Jews in New York that they were excluded from, right? One example was golf, because Jews could not get into a lot of country clubs or any country clubs for a time being. And the resorts of the Catskills became their country clubs, golf and tennis. At golf, at Grossingers, golf was big. The first golf course opened during the Depression, and it continued to devolve. There was lots of the Chanessa family and lots of exhibitions over the years. The Bauer sisters and Marlene Hagee. It was just an amazing thing. When I was 13, Grossingers opened the Big G golf course, which was meant to be somewhat of an answer, though not much, to the Incredible Monster. It was also when I started my long passion for golf and now 50-year obsession. And my brother and I started the New York State Open, and of course, the Sullivan County Democrats started there, and it really became a thing that was very important. So you see a lot of people coming up to play golf and a lot of pro-ams. I remember Willie Mays coming up to play in a pro-am, but he couldn't play golf. And he actually on one hole, I think it was on the 15th hole, hit the ball behind him. So those are the kind of things that you experience there. Now, the next thing for me, which is important to Grossingers, was barrel jumping. Now, I don't know where, but Canada, you could find a sport developed where people skate around on speed skates, which are dangerous, jumping over barrels on ice. But they did. And for many years, the World Championships were held at Grossingers, and they were filmed and put on Wide World of Sports. Now, when I was doing this, getting ready to talk about this, I was sure in my mind that I had seen the barrel jumping in the opening of the Wide World of Sports. So I went on YouTube today to check, and I actually had made it up. I looked up at 4 or 5 different openings of Wide World of Sports. I never found the barrel jumping, but I did find that the Grossingers barrel jumping was included in the clips when they did the silver anniversary special for ABC Sports and talk for ABC Network and show the sports. So barrel jumping was a big deal. Wide World of Sports came to Grossingers, and it was featured in our weekly winter. Every Saturday we had an ice show in the winter, and barrel jumping was part of it. And that looks like, there it is right there. Great timing on that barrel jumping championship. So really, really exciting stuff for barrel jumping. And I think everybody who remembers Grossingers remembers barrel jumping for some reason. And of course, last and probably for Grossingers most important was boxing. At that time, the center of boxing was in New York. And all the fights most of the fights took place at the Garden, the big fights at least, or in small places in Brooklyn or wherever. And for the big fights, the athletes found that just such a close run up to Grossingers or to the Catskills, because boxers actually trained at the other hotels as well, was a great place to train. And really for Grossingers, boxing is what helped make Grossingers as world famous as it became, and my grandmother as world famous as she became. Because when Rocky Marciano and Ingemar Johansson came up and trained at Grossingers, they brought with them a flock of beat writers. And when it rained and they couldn't jog, and when it rained and they couldn't train, they started writing about Grossingers. And all of a sudden, the famous writers were writing about Grossingers. And it became a very, very important thing. And, the boxing tradition continued on from Ingemar and Rocky to to Hector Camacho, Michael Spinks, Ken Norton, trained for his Ali fight. Trevor Berbick trained for his Tyson fight. Roberto Duran trained for the No Mas fight. And then he went to Las Vegas. So that was a really big deal. And boxing really became synonymous with Grossingers. There was always somebody training, and it was really a great thing. Now, I'll close with this. My late brother, when he went to Atlantic City, he brought a lot of his boxing contacts with him. And as a result, when he went to work for the Trump organization and they did all the Trump was a new casino owner there, and they did all the fights, and the Tyson and signing Mike Tyson and doing all those things was based on my brother's contacts from all the boxers that trained at Grossingers. And that's kind of, unfortunately, that's not fortunately, depending on where you come from, what made Donald Trump what he became. He became a world famous casino operator because of those fights. So if you didn't like Trump getting elected president, you can blame it back on boxing and Grossingers, because without that, he probably wouldn't have become the world renowned casino operator that he was. So with that, I will turn it over. I hope that wasn't too long and too fast. And I will turn it over, I guess, who's next? Mark?
Yep. Mark, please. No, Mitchell, that was great. Thanks. A great start.
I'm up now.
Yep, please.
All right. No, that was very good. And I have to tell you, when I look back, and I've done a lot of looking back over the last bunch of years, Grossingers was the template for the idea of having celebrities, whether they were sports or entertainment celebrities. I mean, they set the pattern way before we really got into the game. But after World War II and into the early 50s, late 40s, 50s, we started to jump on board and landed in with both feet. And the first story I have for you has to do with, as Mitchell mentioned, Rocky Marciano. He had a championship fight, two in fact, against Ezra Charles. Ezra Charles was our first fighter we ever had at the hotel. And so simultaneously, Rocky was at Grossingers, Ezra Charles was with us. There was a terrific synergy there, and the media picked that up instantly. And to the point, during that period, Edward R. Murrow, who was doing a show at that time on Sundays called See It Now, he set up a special interview where CBS brought in split screen technology, which had never been used before on national TV, and had interviews with Charles and Marciano in a split screen that was really quite something. And that was exciting for us. I mean, it gave us a shot into that world, which from that point we never stopped. And for boxing, we had so many people train with us over the years. Ali is a unique story because he trained with us as Cassius Clay, as Muhammad Ali. But more interestingly, he came up at times that were least expected, just popped into the hotel. We had George Chuvalo training for a fight with Jimmy Ellis, a big prelude to whoever won that fight, would go on to the championship against him. And he shows up at the hotel. He brings up his bus. He had his own bus, and he brought up 20 of the top sports people from New York. As he got close to the hotel, he told the bus driver, "I want to drive into the hotel." So he comes down our road, and he immediately drives the bus into a ditch by the golf course. We rescued everybody, brought him in, pulled the bus out, and he gets off the bus. I don't know if you can, if I put a picture up here, if you can see it, but that's Muhammad Ali getting off the bus, and he has a mop and a pail, because he had names for everybody, and he called George Chuvalo the washerwoman. He caused such a commotion. He comes down in there and into that training camp It was hysterical. I won't dwell on Ali too much, but so over the years, probably the most interesting guy. I mean, Patterson trained with us, Archie Moore, on and on and on. Leon Spinks was hysterical. He trained with us for his fight against Ali, which the fact that he won it was unbelievable. He was very talented, but if his training camp, he spent as much time sneaking out of the house he was staying in, one of our homes in Monticello, and going to the bars at night as he did training. And he took Ali out in 15 rounds. Think about that. But he was a bright light. So as we went on, we actually ended up elevating our game. And in the 90s, we came up with an arrangement. I worked with Bobby Goodman of Madison Square Garden, and we actually did live fights from the stage of our nightclub that were broadcast over the Madison Square Garden network. They were real deal fights. They were not, Lou Savarese fought in one, Alex Stewart fought in another. These were interesting fights that we were the promoters of. So anyway, that was boxing, which was a big sport for us in those years. The Stokes game, basketball was huge for us. I mean, our ties.
Mark, take 1 minute to explain who Maurice Stokes was. Some of the people may not know.
Okay, I'll go slow. Okay, so Maurice Stokes was, in his era, one of the great upcoming basketball players around. He was Magic Johnson before there was a Magic Johnson. He was that kind of an all-around player. He played in every All-Star game. He was the rookie of the year in his rookie year. And he played for Cincinnati Royals. He was injured in the last game of the season against Detroit, went unconscious on the airplane coming back to Cincinnati, and ended up with a form of encephalitis. He was in a coma for months and then totally invalided from that point on. And there was no pension plan in the NBA. The NBA was simple back then, but Jack Twyman jumped in and who was his teammate, and he actually legally adopted Maurice Stokes to help him out. He and my father got together because we had done a bunch of charity games with the Harlem Globetrotters, with others, and it was a perfect venue. My father said to Jack, "Look, you get the ball players, we'll take care of everything else, and we will raise money, and every penny will go to help Maurice Stokes." Every famous ball player that you could imagine wanted to play in that game. At the time, in those first early years, it was more consequential than the NBA All-Star game. It just was a powerful, powerful thing. We had thousands and thousands of people. We had a special afternoon game where Red Auerbach, who was our director of activities and athletics, would do a whole forum for the kids, and we ran that game for 42 years. We continued it on into the 2000s with a celebrity golf tournament where every team had a player and a pro. Great tournament, and it was really quite meaningful. To give you an idea, on the 25th anniversary of the game, we decided to do a second game, which we called the Legends game, and Wilt was playing it, and Bob Cousy and Billy Cunningham and Oscar Robertson. I mean, it was a who's who of the people of that era who came to play in the game also. After that game, the NBA actually adopted the Legends game and used it and called me up to see if I could get Wilt to play in it, but he wouldn't. But our game he would play in. Anyway, so that was basketball. And just one aside on basketball. In the 2000s, we had a convention that we did every year with Gleason's Gym, where the people checked into the hotel. We had all of the equipment there, professional trainers, and our guests at that time who checked in with that had a whole boxing tournament. So anyway, so that's basketball for now, except for the one added thing, which most people aren't even aware of. But every Memorial Day for about 15 years, in conjunction with Dial Soap, we did a high school classic from the 70s and through the mid 80s. And the best high school ball players in the country would come up for that Memorial Day weekend. And I mean, it was a who's who of people. I can never forget when Moses Malone checked into the hotel with all these kids. He was like a man among boys. You knew he immediately would go to the pros, which he did quite successfully. I mean, Ernie Grunfeld and Bernard King one year, who were teammates, came up. Michael Jordan in 1984 was at the game, and he wasn't like the biggest name at that point. I mean, he hadn't really gotten to that stage, but he was there playing. Anyway, so that's that one. Our relationships that we developed with people along the way. Red Auerbach, who worked for us, which was just so fortuitous. He came to work at the hotel at the suggestion of his parents, who were guests in 1950. He was still coaching in Washington. The next year, he moved on to Boston. His life took off, and we were with him for the next decade and a half. And he was with us in the Stokes game right through the whole thing. Joe Lapchick, who was a dear friend, Hall of Fame, an original Celtic, worked for us for every summer for a bunch of years. Claire B, of course, because we had Kutcher Sports Academy. We had a synergy with that and with our other Camp Anawana, where we were bringing people up continually from all sports. And most times they stayed at the hotel. A guy like Roy White and his family were with us for a month every summer. It's part of our hotel firmament. And of course,
from the Yankees. I mean, the outfielder from the Yankees. Yeah. Other baseball stars, Mark?
Yeah, we had loads of. I mean, Mickey Mantle, was there at the hotel, and Whitey Ford. I remember one of the earliest pictures I still have. I remember it as a kid. One of the All-Star breaks, Bill Skowron, Enos Slaughter was playing for the Yankees at that time. Tom Brennan, they were all, they'd show up, but that was always continual. But I'm looking for the extra added things. And one of the things which gets into Steve's realm, which we were able to do, was in 1985, I was contacted by the people who had run the major tennis tournament in Mahwah. They had the space to do the Virginia Slims tournament for the women that was 2 weeks ahead of the US Open. And they asked me if we would be interested in hosting it. It was a crazy year. We were in the middle of rebuilding the sports academy. We had a terrible fire in the early fall. And it was like, do I want to do something else? But it was just so appealing. We had to do it. And it was really a great event. You had this, the big deal, the women's tour arrived at our hotel, and it really was terrific. Gabriella Sabatini had just entered the tour, and she was, she was a darling. She was just great. So, that's just some of the highlights. It was meaningful for us, for all of the hotels up there, to be in that firmament, but it was something we really enjoyed. It reflected what our hotel was about, which was really sports, families, and that type of thing. It suited us so well, and it was so meaningful in just so many ways. So
great, thank you, Mark. I want to add, I'm going to ask Steve to speak in a second. Let me just add two things. One, not only did we watch sports, but we played. Obviously, all the hotels had softball fields, tennis courts, whatever the case may be, and the guests played. But in the 50s in particular, when Wilt was at your place, there was that league that we had between hotels. So we put up a team for our best boys, waiters, bellhops, whoever. We tried to hire the tallest guys we could find, as you did, and of course. And those games were played, for those who don't recall, outdoors. The pictures that when Mark was speaking, the first few pictures of the Stokes game was their outdoor court. When we were, my grandparents owned the Delano, we played on an outdoor court. We put in lights. The only thing we had to do was we had to explain to the visiting team where the lumps were on the blacktop, so that when they dribbled, they didn't just hit the ball and would go flying. They had to work around it. That wasn't the case in yours in Kutcher's, but our course were something of an adventure. So I've
got one little anecdote which is wonderful.
Sure.
So Red Auerbach was kind enough to arrange the original Boston Celtic floor. They were storing in Providence, Rhode Island. He says, if you want it, send your trucks down, go get it. I got it. We put it in the field house at the Sports Academy. And when we first got it, right in front of the Stokes game, Bob Cousy and I went down. I wanted to show it to him. So he took a ball, he went around, bounced it, took a couple of shots, came back to me off the court, and he said, same dead spots.
Great story, Mark. Thank you. Steve White, tell us a bit about the Concord, in particular tennis, but you're not limited to that. You played with and invited tennis stars for literally 25 years. What was it like? And we'll have some slides that you can talk about as well. Please.
Okay, thanks. I was the head pro, the director of tennis at the Concord for 25 years. And during our heyday, we were the biggest tennis complex in the Northeast. We had 16 indoor courts, 24 outdoor courts. And as a result, we became a major player in junior tennis. So much so, that so many of the Eastern Tennis Association tournaments were held at our place. John McEnroe won a few of those and almost got kicked out of the ETA for lighting the drapes in his room on fire. But a gentleman by the name of Bob Towers, Ruben Turetsky, who did all the advertising for the Concord, prevented the ETA from kicking him out. And as a result, McEnroe, after he won Wimbledon, came back to play exhibitions at our place. And the exhibitions were like a lifeblood there. Right throughout the years, we had, and every weekend in the summer, every holiday, from Don Budge to Bjorn Borg. And then you had the sports stars who would try to play tennis also. And I should say, from Tracy Austin to Billie Jean King, who's right there, and I'm going to talk about her in a minute. But from Gretzky to Hank Greenberg, we had tons of them. And then you had the showbiz celebrities from Neil Simon to Bill Cosby. So I'm just going to, and there's a picture of Ely Nastasi. And for those of you who remember, the image he created of being the bad boy of tennis, it was so the opposite when he did an exhibition. He couldn't be more gracious and lend his time to people. He was really a nice guy. Well, McEnroe was not, in the exhibitions. And, but I want to highlight just a few. Here's Pete Rose. I saw him, like I told took a picture with him when he was betting the Rose Bowl in the owner's office. he was actually a nice guy too, but you put that story together. And here we go with some of the, with the racket in their hand, you got Don Budge, who, unbelievable gentleman, is still the greatest single backhand, one-handed backhand I ever saw. Pancho Gonzalez, Clark Graebner, Bobby Riggs, and Pancho Segura. I mean, this is, creme de la creme of tennis players. And, but I want to highlight a couple of people that I met over the years, and not to diminish. Well, one of the stories was going to be with the two guys on the left here, Tony Vincent, who was a national amateur champion, and Hank Greenberg. If you remember him, hit 58 home runs for the Tigers back in the day. And I asked him, because my father had told me, I didn't ever watch him play, that they wouldn't pitch to him because he was Jewish and they didn't want him to break Babe Ruth's record. And he was so classy, he would never talk about it. But we would play doubles. He would play with Tony. I played with Bob Towers for $25 a man. Every time they came up, we had a great time. And Hank, as you can see, he was a big man and very imposing at the net. And same with Bob Towers too. These guys didn't run at all. Me and Tony were exhausted at the end of the match. Here's Vitas with a guest he met 5 minutes ago. And, so let me and Dave Winfield and Rose again. But the highlight of two people that transcended tennis. One, Billie Jean King. And you have to remember now, before they started naming stadiums after her and the world recognized her greatness and importance, people ran for cover when she came out as a gay woman. Her sponsors left, and we never did. We brought her up all the time to play exhibitions, and to her credit, she never forgot that, and right up until the end, she came. And she would come with Alana Kloss, with her partner, who in her own right was a great player, and infectious energy. She was an amazing, powerful person. And it was my privilege, really, to get to know her. And Arthur Ashe is another one I want to mention. By the time I got to know him, it was tragic what happened to him, to get AIDS by a blood transfusion. And he couldn't even walk down to the tennis court. His heart was weakening. I would drive him in a golf cart and he couldn't play, obviously. And he would give a talk. And, sometimes you just know when you're next to greatness. That's the way it was with this guy. He was an amazing guy. And I know people are going to question this, but Bill Cosby, now, who knew? I didn't know. But, he was a great athlete at Temple. So he always wanted to do an exhibition when he came up. And the first time he did one, I remember I was the other pro and myself, I was on the other side. And those of you who remember the outdoor court at the Concord, it was like a natural bowl there. And I could not see the grass. That's how many people were there. By far and away, the biggest turnout ever for an exhibition that I did. And my legs were in concrete. I was scared to death. And Cosby, I served to him and he swung and the ball went through his racket. And then he held it up and said, I took the wrong racket. There were no strings in that racket. And it broke the ice. And he was great all the time when he came up. He was funny and he was very good also. And Hank I talked about, and McEnroe I talked about, and I got a million stories, but
Steve, you told me about the secret of the exhibitions. What was the secret of the exhibition matches?
The secret was to bring it to a tiebreaker. So no one ever got beat badly. And these guys are so good, they made it look good. It's hard to fix
Fix
something,
within.
to fix something, and make it seem normal. And they were really good at it. And they would go, and then they play for real in the tiebreaker.
Terrific. Okay, thank you, Steve. We'll come back to the speakers in a minute if as we go around. Alan Barish, what would you like to add?
What can I say? These
Well-
guys were great. It was wonderful. I mean, it was fabulous. We had their stories could go on too. We had a meeting before this of these guys, and they just had great stories. A couple of things. There were so many other sports we didn't talk about. Ice skating we didn't talk about. Golf we really didn't talk about. And they're the greatest pros, and I'm sure there's other sports we're not mentioning too. But besides the celebrities and just the whole connection with the Catskills was worth fascinating. I'm going to shut up, listen to these guys. They were just great. Thanks.
Well, you mentioned other sports. We didn't mention golf, really. I got from somebody sent me, I can't recall who, an exhibition between Arnold Palmer and somebody else at the Concord, not at the Monster. It was pre-Monster. It was at the International. Everybody who had anything to do with golf here knew that Jimmy Demerit was the golf pro at the Concord. Growing up, I had no clue this was a great golfer, having won, championships in the 30s, 40s, whatever. All I know is you went, and as a kid, many of us went to caddy. I've said this before, my experience was one day. My buddy Mike Bernstein said, "Come on, I'll teach you what to do, just follow me." And the first time I got up there, the caddy master gave me a double 18. You know what that means? Carrying two huge bags. I'm about 15 years old, and then going for 18 holes, and one goes this way and the other guy hits it this way. I made it lugging the bags through 9 holes, and they begged the caddy master to replace me. I was so thrilled. I got my $6 or whatever it was. But the lineup of golf stars at the Concord, once the Monster came in, was really quite amazing. And as I've traveled around in my professional life, I would mention where I was from, and I'm sitting in whether it's Detroit or Cleveland or Seattle. First thing someone says to me, "Did you ever play the Monster?" How do you know from the Monster? These people, it's known all over the world, and it coined the term, and it became world renowned. And of course, all the sports stars, and many people, I believe, I'm not stealing your thunder, Steve, many people came up to be able to say they played the Monster. Never mind they did 180 strokes, and it took them, 5 hours just to wander around the course. But they all wanted to be able to say they played the Monster. Same with the Grossingers, the Big G. I mean, everybody wanted to be able to say they played. You guys had 27 holes. Others had only 18. So you could mix and match the holes at Grossinger's and have a different golfing experience every day. Is that right, Mitch?
Yeah, and I think I was thinking about this when I was thinking about tonight is, I think at the end, the Concord had 54 holes, right?
Yeah.
All
And
told,
Grossinger's
yeah.
had 27 holes. I mean, when you think about that, now these mega golf complexes are commonplace. You go places, they got, 4 courses, 6 courses. But back then it was unheard of. And it was another thing where the mountains were really the forerunner of these types of things. But it is true. There was a lot of holes everywhere.
Well, anything you guys thought of before I open it up to questions? By the way, for those who haven't already, you can hit the button that says more. Oh, I think there's quite a few here. Let's look in the chat box and see if we have any questions. I don't think there's any questions. Why don't we just do it this way? If you want to say something about your experience or ask a question of one of our panelists, put your hand up, but I may not see it. Hit the button that says raise hand. I see one, Jeff Gersten. You're on mute, Jeff.
Okay, I just hit unmute.
Okay.
Okay, I have a comment for Mark and a question for Steve, if that's okay.
Yes.
Okay, Mark, I remember going to the Stokes game every year. And one year in particular, I remember you walking off with Wilt Chamberlain saying no autographs to everybody. And I said to you, Mark, if you want to still be able to have math homework to copy. You better let me get an autograph. And I guess I punked out because you graduated from Monticello High School.
In spite of that.
Right.
Okay. A
Question?
question for Steve. I believe it was 1968. It might have been 67, but I believe it was 68. I was a marshal at a golf tournament at the Concord, an LPGA golf tournament. Our job was to keep the spectators off the course, which was rather easy because the only spectators were the relatives of the golfers. The LPGA was basically a nothing sport back there. I was wondering, A, if you remembered that tournament, and if B, if they had, more golf tournaments at the Concord courses.
I don't remember that tournament, and golf was not my major interest that much. I started playing later than that, and must tell you, so everyone knows this, that as great as the monster was, to this day, up here, there is no course like Grossinger's. Just going to say that because I became a decent golfer, and Grossinger's was the best test of golf.
Right.
Jeff, I didn't play. I don't think I played in the one in '68, but the Parker family was nice enough to invite me to a number of the ladies' tournaments that they ran, and it was the pro-am portion of it. And for at least 2 or 3 years, one of my partners was Paul Grossinger. We had a lot of fun doing it. We had one tournament where we were playing with Donna Capone, and after 9 holes, we were 9 under par, and actually 10 under. We stopped to have a brief lunch, had a couple of beers, and we finished at the same 10 under. But those were good memories.
A couple of comments. I don't know if Randy Ringler's still on. She says her husband, Jim O'Brien, was one of Kutcher's basketball coaches, 1960s Michigan State. Would love to find any pictures. He had great stories. He passed away in 2013. I used to be a Mets executive, it says. Bob Murphy would do college football games, and he said that he stayed at Grossinger's when he would do the Cornell games, which is interesting. Jen Shea.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I'm on.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was actually up at Cornell when I heard Bob doing the game, and I went up to the press box, and that's when he told me, he says, yeah, every year I come, I stay at Grossinger's, and as Mitch, I'm sure knows, so many of my classmates from the hotel school worked at Grossinger's. And in fact, my mom was a counselor there in the late 1930s, but so great memories of that. But in terms of Kutcher's, yeah, if you could tell me if there's any way that I can see if there are some pictures of my husband, because he was there for quite a few years in the mid to late 60s. Yeah,
I don't think I have any pictures like that.
Of any of the basketball?
The coaches, because we did all the coaches clinic. We created a coaches clinic, and we had the best coaches in football, basketball, football, and then we did baseball as well. When I was a kid, I got to meet Vince Lombardi, who came up as a lecturer. All the guys that came through there, and of course, some of them ended up working for us. Claire B, we started the sports academy with. He was the coach of. He's in the Hall of Fame and the coach of LIU, and won national championships. Joe Lapchick, who I mentioned, but. So we did these every year in June, and then we started doing twice a year. We brought in the best clinicians we could find. And in those days, you could get the greatest guys, the best football coaches, basketball coaches. And we ran them through the 90s. I remember in the 90s, Mike Krzyzewski was up and Jim Boeheim, and the list goes on and on. But this was part of our sports networking, the feed into things. We had Hank Stram. I'll get back to you, but we had Hank Stram, who came up as a clinician. We got friendly with him. We started for 3 or 4 years. We ran a football camp for the for up and coming kids at Camp Anawana with Hank and Lenny Dawson and Buck Buchanan and a bunch of the other Kansas City people. And so there was a synergy in all of the sports. One thing led to another and another. But I don't have a lot of coach pictures.
Well, he played with Willis and all those guys. So pictures of them he might be in. That's why I'm asking.
Possible.
What year was Jim a coach?
He was there he was Michigan State class of 68, and he played in Europe after. So I think probably from like 64 to 69, that time period.
Yeah. I have a few file cabinets still up in Sullivan County with the pictures I don't have down in Florida, but
you got to scan them, Mark.
Some way we can get in contact. Let me know.
Yeah. Steve, either you or Mitchell were telling me beforehand about the basketball scandals when the city colleges used to have all the championships, and then there was the scandals. One of you spoke to that. I don't know, Mitch. Did you?
To me, obviously, it's a little before my time, but the fact is a lot. The as I've been told, the point shaving scandals in college basketball that kind of changed the face of college basketball from New York oriented CCNY LIU began because when the kids came up for the summer leagues and worked at the hotels, and they had these games. I don't know if it's the same ones that you played in. Oftentimes they would have lotteries about what the total point score would be, and they'd call timeout towards the end of the game. And lo and behold, the guy who had the right number might not have actually been there, and the money got divided up among the players. And that was kind of how they got a taste of it. And a lot of those players that were caught up in those scandals, unfortunately, kind of one of the dark sides of sports in the Catskills and the Borscht Belt, I guess. But it really did begin up there in the summer activities.
Marvin, I had spoken the last time we met, and that my dad played JV for CCNY, and what happened on the varsity, soured him for the rest of his life. He could care less about basketball after that. And CCNY went from winning the NIT and NCAAs in the same year,
which is virtually unheard of.
It'll never happen again because they don't do it. And
but even then, it was an amazing feat.
And LIU also, and St. John's as well, except they answered to a higher power, so they kept going.
Mark?
Yeah, Nat Holman was the coach at CCNY. Wonderful athlete, wonderful man. We did a lot of things with, but it changed the arc of what happened in the Catskills. We all had teams. We continued having teams for years after all the other hotels had disbanded it. We still had Red working for us. The players that we were able to get, when Will came to work for us in 54 and 55 as a bellhop, he was still in high school. So because NCAA players could not play in the summer league. We brought in players. We had terrific players from the NIA. We had some of the high school players going on to college. Hugo Green. Oh, you have to be as old as me to remember him. When I was in the children's dining room, he was my waiter, but he was the number one player in the world for Duquesne. But the senior year in high school, he played at Kutcher's. So it did change what happened in the mountains and basically killed the league. I still have copies of the schedules from that summer league. And you know, how the teams were doing with little scores about them.
Yeah, here's that famous classic photo. Although this is not the one with him putting it into the first floor window,
No,
but this
no.
is typical of Wilt's tenure as a bellhop.
You have to wonder where we got the guy from Central Casting to be the guest.
A vintage classic Catskill guest.
I don't remember the guy who was checking in, but I don't think I ever saw a guest who dressed quite like him before or since.
Right. There's also not only visiting the Catskills, but I thought, Alan, you might have brought this up. Willis Reed had a place up here in Callicoon for many, many years, and you'd be walking down Broadway or someplace and you'd see Willis Reed. I know he probably came to your place.
He belonged to the hunting camp down there. No, he loved it.
Yeah. So some of them decided to stay up
Walt
here.
Frazier lived up here too, didn't he, for a while?
Say again?
Walt Frazier, Clyde Frazier lived up here.
I didn't hear that.
I tell you what, though, he when we first started the sports academy, like about the second or third year, we did an arrangement where we had alternating 2 weeks. We had Walt Frazier and Julius Erving, who would come in, do the 2 weeks, leave, come back. We did that for a couple of years. That was great. And those guys were, I tell you what, when we ended up buying a piece of property. So I'll give you a list of people who were part of that deal. So we had Walt Frazier, who was a partner, Julius, Billy Cunningham, Bob Lanier, and George McGinnis. I mean, how bad a basketball team is that? When I sold the property back in 2013, the only other person on that contract, aside from my family, was Julius Erving, because he wouldn't sell me the property back, which I tried to get when I was in the middle of the casino deals. He says, look, I'm with you. Whenever you sell it, that's when I'm going out. That's the way it is.
We would not have known that, Mark. Thank you.
No, you wouldn't.
Anything else?
Mark, we didn't mention like Buster Crabbe, that kind of.
The Concord.
Yeah.
Well, people would know. Steve, you may want to comment then. Buster Crabbe was the lifeguard at the outdoor pool for all our years.
No. He wasn't he would come up and do these races on the weekends.
He was there walking around the pool as the quote unquote lifeguard. Everybody saw him wore these tiny little trunks for this huge guy. And for me growing up, I've said this to you all, not so much that he was an Olympic swimmer, but he played Tarzan in the movies. And when I grew up, he was Flash Gordon. When I lived in Florida as a kid in the 50s, we went down every winter. You go to I can't remember the beach or the Carib, one of the movie theaters, you'd see 25 cartoons, 2 episodes of Flash Gordon, and a movie for a quarter. And my mom would drop us off at 10 in the morning and pick us up at 5 at night, and without adults. They would, because it was just done that way differently. But Buster Crabbe, if you don't remember Flash Gordon, it was before CGI, and they had that little rocket ship with the smoke coming out the back, and there would be a guy in the back sort of moving it like this across the screen so you could get the impression.
Yeah.
So that was why. But Buster Crabbe was a very nice guy, pleasant.
I think that we forget how important the Catskills was in the entertainment and in that universe. And so when you would do something like, I remember, Florence Chadwick swam the English Channel, was there for the opening. I don't remember because I wasn't there, but was there for the opening of the Grossinger's indoor pool, right? And Sonia Henney was always there, doing appearances at the ice rink. And Irving Jaffe, who was a Olympic medal winner, was a skating director. But it was that was great to be doing those things in the Catskills at that time. It was, like being at Caesar's Palace in the 1980s, and people look forward to making those appearances and coming up there. And those are things that I think we tend to forget of what the Catskills and the Borscht Belt meant to the rest of the industry at that time, because we look at the empty lots, so, now, and we lose sight of that. But if you think about it and you look at the pictures and you remember, you know how meaningful it really was.
Mitchell, nobody among all the hotels that I've ever been in, nobody had more photos on the wall
Yeah.
than you did going into the coffee shop.
Yeah.
There were hundreds of photos, whether it's Eddie Fisher and Liz, or Debbie and Eddie and all of that, or Burton, or any, I mean, you know, mentioned Jackie Robinson and Nelson Rockefeller was always, all the other thing is the politicos.
Yeah.
All the statewide political office holders had to stop at Grossinger's, Kutcher's, Concord, because they could see 2,000 to 3,000 people in one stop just by walking through the lobby or being around after a show. And so Rockefeller was a regular hired fella, you know, he would do his thing, and Jenny, your grandmother, would walk him around. And Bobby Kennedy was campaigned here in Sullivan County and spoke on the courthouse steps on behalf of his brother in 1960. So it was a way, and Judge Cook, should, you know, of blessed memory, would always say that no matter where he traveled, people knew he was from the Catskills. Of course, he was the chief judge of the state of New York, as was Judith Kay. And he told great stories about people that he met coming and going in all different places. And I've been, my travels around the globe, if I tell people where I'm from, they've got a Catskill story. Doesn't matter if they're, you know, if they have any contact whatsoever with the US, they've all been here.
Mark mentioned Bobby Goodman before, and the boxing promoter. So I met him in Atlantic City when I was working there, and I'm like, well, you know, were you at Grossinger's? Oh, what are you kidding? I was conceived there.
Nobody could top that one, Mitchell.
No,
That's great.
I like it.
Terrific. Any other questions from folks as we're approaching the hour? We have time. If anybody has a question,
You know,
want to
Mark,
put up your hand, I can try and see you. There's a lot of people on just without the video, but with the audio. So please speak up if you have a question or a comment.
I just want to say one thing to the other guys and get their opinion, because you know when Mark told the story about playing with Paul Grossinger, you know, I was thinking earlier in the hour that one thing was that everybody kind of was at everybody else's stuff. You know, like whether you know, Paul was at the Pro-Am at the LPGA, or I remember every year going to the Stokes game and watching it with my brother and things like that. And everybody participated in everybody else's stuff. And it was a really nice aspect of the families that own the hotels. And as we kind of said in our pre-call, you know, everybody wanting everybody to do well. I don't know if everybody, if the other guys want to comment on that.
Yeah, it's true. Look, Mitch, your mother calls me. I speak to her a few times a year right now. And she calls me up for her to, you know, if she wants me to get involved in the museum or that. Yeah, I can't say no to her. I mean, you know, the relationship between the families, I'll give you a little aside, which you probably don't even know. Back in the 1940s, early 40s, my mother was in college at Delhi and as in the hotel program. And as part of the program, you had to have a summer internship. And they offered her an internship at the Concord or Grossinger's. And she chose to go to Grossinger's that summer. And when she went, the family was aware of her, and they sat down with her and they said, you know, you can eat with us at our family table. And she's, no, that's not how I am going to do this exactly. But everybody, you know, everybody was very gracious. And, you know, that started our relationship with Grossinger's. I mean, I took tennis lessons at Grossinger's as a kid. I'd go to the ice skating rink. You know, we were closed in the winters. I would go ice skate at the Concord regularly with my family. You know, this was normal stuff. We were friends with everybody else. We did stuff.
Yeah, I was mentioning before, the racetrack was one of those things, which was what, 58, I guess it opened 57, in which several of the hotel owners got together for the mutual benefit of everybody. And from those meager beginnings, and, you know, whether it was your dad, Mark, or Sidney Sussman, or a number of other hotel owners, Paul Grossinger, I'm sure, from those meager beginnings to the point where we used to have 10,000 day racing on a Saturday, and then it emptied, and 10,000 at night. Think about it. 20,000 people attended racing at Monticello Raceway, probably in the 80s, late 70s, when Leon Greenberg was the president. And it was an amazing thing that it did. I mean, Bethel Woods does that now, you know, to have 15, 20,000 people at Bethel Woods, which we have. But in those days, to get 20,000 people in one day and to get them in and get them out and to, you know, charge them, it was $2.25, I think, for the ticket, you know, but everybody had the free tickets on the counters and all the stores in Monticello and Liberty and Fallsburg. But again, that's a situation in which hotel owners got together for a joint project that benefited everybody.
Oh, yeah.
I'll just add that I was, you know, I'm like a few hours younger than Mark. So I was friendly with the children of these families, you know, Karen Kutcher, Carla, if she's on, Bobby Kutcher.
Yeah.
I knew them through school. And Mark Edis, Mitchell, you got to correct me, but he went to Trails End, didn't he? Because right?
Yes,
Okay.
we went to Trails End. Yes.
Okay. So, I mean, it was friendly.
Which is what, a camp, Steve?
A camp, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And we remained friendly, you know, until, you know, that unfortunate thing. So.
Yeah. Yep. It's a culture. I mean, Alan knows because Alan Barish started us down this path. We got a grant from federal government, a meager amount, through the library, through StoryCorps. It's a program in which communities remember their history and culture. And from that, as some of you may not know, we have recorded about 40 individual interviews. I did one with Mark and with Steve, for example, and Alan has done them, and they're all on the website for the library. And the Library of Congress has asked us to send all of those. Jonathan is putting on the screen the link. All of these interviews, because it's a culture, it's a history, it's something that's no longer there. And we use this opportunity to remember those of us who can still what it was like, and to help our families, kids, grandchildren get an appreciation for what it was like, because it's gone. It's totally gone. And yet it was really an idyllic situation for, you know, most of 40 or 50 years. Although John Conway teaches us that it started to go downhill in the 60s, most of us didn't think of it that way. My grandparents had the Delano until 1968, and we had a fire. 60s was a great time. 70s, Mark, what do you say? 80s was even better for Kutchers. Yeah. So, you know, as more and more hotels went out of business, it was the ones that were left got the yeoman's share of the activities. So, okay, anything else that we can cover before we say thank you and goodbye?
It was great. I love listening to these guys. They were just fabulous. You know, for me, a kid growing up, working at Kutcher's was fabulous. Although I was a terrible waiter, terrible busboy, but it was you know, just being around these athletes. I mean, it was like, you know, now I think, why didn't I appreciate this more? All these guys were just there, just hanging out. It was just, you know, I think now it's just I was really a part of something special then. It was really you know, a tremendous thing.
Well, the whole culture, which we've talked about in others, where we would have two set, you know, we lived in two worlds.
Yeah.
From Memorial Day to Labor Day was one world. And then literally the day after Labor Day, we went back to sleepy little communities, Monticello, Liberty, South Fallsburg, or whatever, went back to high school with the same friends that we grew up with. And we'd see people at our hotel and they say, you actually live here? You go to school here? They couldn't believe anybody lived here. They thought it was just a vacation paradise. So it was a different culture. And then later, as more and more hotels opened for the winter, it was a different, you know, we were able to stretch the season, so to speak. The best thing you could say to someone is have a good season, because we literally, many of us made our livelihoods in a 10-week period. You know, we as waiters and busboys and so forth made thousands of dollars in a 10-week period. But our parents that were in the hotel business and grandparents made the nut by working all, people don't know, 7 days a week in the dining room, 3 meals a day, 7 days a week, 8 weeks straight, no meals off. It just was unheard of. You worked your tail off and so you could make it through the winter. Any other questions before we say thank you to our panelists?
Marvin, can I say a couple of things? Jack
Of
Levine.
course. Say again?
Jack Levine.
Yes, Jack.
I remember you from, I think, 70 years ago, but in the second half of the 60s and the first half of the 70s, a bunch of local guys put together a summer basketball team, and we played all of the other teams that were still around up in the Catskills, including Kutcher's. We named the team the Hurleyville Eagles after the team that my dad coached and played for about 80 years ago. So we called our team the Hurleyville Eagles. One thing I'd mention about the Hurleyville Eagles is there were two stars of the team, Nat and Ben Newman. They called them the Newman brothers, which I've gathered from reading old articles and so on. Nat Newman was really Nat Militsock, who was playing for the Knicks at the same time, pre-NBA, but he was using an assumed name in playing for the Hurleyville Eagles. They imported some other players from New York. They had a big guy, his name is escaping me, my brothers might remember, but they had the center jump back then after every basket, and it made Hurleyville kind of hard to beat. But the team that we had, the only team we ever lost to was Kutcher's. We would beat every other team, and most of the guys on the team played some level of college basketball. And I wrote down some of the names because you're all local, so you might remember. But we had Eddie Strong from Monticello, who played for St. Peter's. Willie Bradley played college ball somewhere out west. We had a few other Monticello guys. Joe Lewis from Liberty played for Cheney State. You had me, Larry Gainan, my brother Charlie. We all played for what was Harper College back then, but became Binghamton. We had three Davis brothers from Woodridge. Charlie Davis, Charlie played on one of the best teams that Fallsburg ever had, but he played for Lane College, Tennessee. Greg Davis played for Vermont. Barry Davis played for Buffalo State. Sam Copeland played for Vermont, was Rookie of the Year in the conference, transferred to UNLV. And then we'd pick up some stray dogs like Brian Newmark. I don't know if you remember him, Mark, but he played for us. His brother Shorty, remember, played for the St. Louis Hawks. And Brian had a huge afro. He was a stoner, played for Harvard. When we recruited him to our team, he gave me a bloody nose on the layup line. When I was shooting a layup, he was on the rebounding line. He blocked it back into my face. So we beat some of the guys that we played against. Otto Moore, Mark, I don't know if you remember him, but you had Otto Moore, a 7-footer who went on to be the center for the Detroit Pistons for a dozen years or so. And Dana Lewis, another 7-footer who was the best high school player in the country at the time. And my brother Charlie, who I think was in 10th grade at the time and really, went on to become one of the best high school players we've ever had in Sullivan County. But I put Charlie into the game to guard Otto Moore, and Charlie can comment if he wants, but Charlie's, a 6'2", 16-year-old kid, and Otto Moore got the ball in the low post, turned to go up to dunk, and Charlie blocked it right at Otto's waist. And at some point, as Otto still went up to dunk, Charlie decided to let go of the basketball before he was dunked also. Lou Eisenstein would ref games at Kutcher's, my all-time favorite ref, because when he reffed the St. John's game in the Garden, they couldn't be beat. Didn't matter who they would play in the country. St. John win that game. We played against John Kuster at Kutcher's, who was Phil Ford's backcourt on the great North Carolina team, went on to play for Kansas City Kings. Mel Utley, I can't remember whether we played against him or not, but really good St. John's player. We played against Klein's Hillside that had Larry Newbold, and Dana Lewis was playing for them too. That's where George Mikan played, like back in the
Way back, yeah.
40s or something, way before my time. So we beat those guys, and I had a bunch of other guys come up from Binghamton University, but a friend of mine, Ed Turan, who the coach never let it get off the bench, but just a 6'3", nasty physical guy inside, just destroyed Dana Lewis in that game, who then went on to play for Oral Roberts in Tulsa, got drafted, I think, 10th or so by the Philadelphia 76ers, then disappeared. Lou Getz from Rutgers, I don't know, do you remember him? Mark was on that same team with Otto Moore.
Yeah.
Went on to coach. We played against Ronnie Rothstein at one of the camps, who became the Miami Heat and Detroit Pistons head coach. It just went on and on. It was fantastic for us. And it's, I think, one of the rare times that maybe we got all these guys from the different high schools to come together and play together. So I thought that might be interesting for all of you to hear.
Thanks so much, Jack. By the way, I saw a chat from Jen, who has, I think it's Chad. Jen, you may want to say a word about the Borscht Belt Tattler. You have a podcast that's.
I just came in here so I could get you on as a guest. I'm just gonna follow you. That's my chutzpah move.
That's okay. Jen,
just
Jen has
follow
started
you.
a
Hi.
podcast. She's in Canada, but she loves the Borscht Belt and started this podcast.
Hi, Mark. This is an original.
So it's called
1992.
the Borscht Belt Tattler. And if you're looking for more Borscht Belt stories, you can tune in and
Thank
find it there.
Thank you.
That's
Well,
a free commercial.
yeah. Well, thank you. You inspired me. I just love these talks. I'm probably the weirdest 40-year-old anybody's ever met from Canada that I love the Borscht Belt so much.
Keep the culture alive. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions?
Well, just something. This is being recorded, Marvin, right?
Yes. Mhm. And it'll be available on YouTube, the library's YouTube page.
Okay.
Ethelbert B. Crawford Library. And you can go to the bottom of the screen on the opening page, and there's an arrow for YouTube, and then it should be on there starting tomorrow. Oh, a word of thanks for Jonathan Sager for helping us put this together. And to you, gentlemen, who are just much, much appreciated for your time and energy and remembrances. Mitchell, thank you so much. We wish you and yours well. Mark Kutcher, my classmate. Mark, hi to Carla and the whole team. And Steve White, thank you. Alan Barish, we appreciate it. And again, if you want to find more Borscht Belt stories, you can find it not only on Jen's, but you can find it on the library's website. So with that, we'll say thank you and hopefully look for us again. We'll do another.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Thanks, everyone.